Hey there, it's Kimberly here with Knit for Brains. And do you know what today is? Today is International Granny Square Day. Every August 15th, across the world, specifically on Instagram, everybody who does granny squares gets together and then they do these granny square crochet alongs. So, of course, I had to come on here and share the news with you. And of course, as you know, granny squares are one of my favorite things to do. So I thought today, what better day than to talk about granny squares all day long. We're talking about granny squares all day long. Hey there, it's Kimberly here with Knit for Brains. And do you know what today is? Today is International Granny Square Month. So join me in this episode where we talk about all things granny squares. So as you know, I love to do granny squares. They use up extra yarn, scraps. You can do so many things with granny squares. And because they're little squares, I don't seem to get bored with them. So I thought I would show you today what I'm working on. And I'm also going to try something new that I've never really tried with the granny square. Now I showed you this earlier, a couple weeks back. This is my kind of my work in progress. I am doing a cardigan sweater using granny squares, of course. But what's interesting about this one is, and I'm blocking it as I go, or rather stitching it as I go, this is actually going to be on the bias. So whereas the granny squares normally go straight up and down like this, these are actually coming at an angle. So my squares are actually going to be kind of diamonds, if you will. This is the bottom of my sweater down here, like so. Yeah. And then, so my squares are going to go up in a diamond shape. They're going to go up this way. I really wanted to have this finished by today's episode, but I didn't get around to it. So I thought at least I'll show you what I've got going on. And these particular granny squares, now because of the bias and it going off to an angle, and because I really liked the yarn and I'm kind of copycatting a pattern that I saw in a Johnny Was catalog. Johnny Was is kind of a high-end clothing line. I didn't want to get really crazy with variegated yarns or anything super funky to make my squares. I just wanted to go with the straight up colors. And the colors that I'm using, so the yarn that I'm using is this Queensland Collection Rainbow Beach. I got this collection of random colors in a kit. It was on sale. I got it from Little Knits. And so it included all of these colors. I didn't get to choose these colors. The red, the coral, which they call mahogany. I still can't get over that one. Then there was the yellow, the magenta, or the fuchsia. They call it Great Berry, I think. Cardinal red. Then this nice kind of taupey color. I think they call it spruce. And then I got some extra color of this one here, which is what we call sandpiper, to do my edges. Okay. And also, I'm not doing a traditional granny square join. I'm doing what they call a join as you go. So you can see here, it's got a little bit more of a lace and you literally join the squares as you go along. So it's a little bit different this time. And because of that, I didn't want to go crazy with any kind of fancy granny squares or any kind of fancy colors. I just went with a very traditional, super simple, super easy granny square with the the 3 double crochets around the edges, and then 2 sets of 3 double crochets around the corners, and just going along that way. But I haven't actually done a variegated granny square. I haven't tried that. I've always done just with my solid colors and then changed out the colors, and then I just have to suffer through weaving in all the ends. So today I thought I'm going to show you some of my favorite tricks and tips I have as far as granny squares go. And then maybe together we'll work on a little bit something different, a little variegated. So knowing how much I love to do granny squares, I've been jonesing for a blocking pegboard. And I tried to get the Brit to make one, and he actually went about it and he said, you know, for the size of the peg holes that you're looking for, I really couldn't make anything for you that would suit your needs. You should just go out and buy it. He said I could buy it. So let me show you what I got. So I found this one on Amazon. It's made out of bamboo. It's got this nice little stand here in the back with it's adjustable. So depending on, you know, how high you want it to make, or you can just fold this up and then it can lay totally flat. This is what it looks like. Now, I was really surprised, but there was a lot of granny square blocking boards like this, and the price ranged dramatically. It was from like $14, $15 all the way up to 70 or 80. And I knew I didn't want to spend 70 or 80, but I also wanted something that was big enough that I could do several different squares or different sizes. Some of them are really small, and that really limits you as to what size granny squares you could do. So I went with this one, and I could actually put this a little bit lower, and I could put a couple granny squares on here, and then I've got these triangles here, which is a half size of a granny square. This was actually a really great deal. I'll include the link in the video in the notes of which one that I decided on, because I did a lot of shopping for these. And then in addition to the pegboard, it also came with a hook, which you can always use more hooks, right? And then it also came with some stitch markers, which always nice, some darning needles, and these variable different sizes of blocking pegs. So I have these are little, and they're nice. They're actually nice metal. They're not sharp. They're rounded at the ends. This actually was way better quality than I was anticipating. So as you can see, I've got two different granny squares going on. So I've got these long pegs here, and then I've got these short pegs over here. And these short pegs are these guys right here. Okay, so you just basically, you take it, let's see if I can show this to you, and then you just figure out which hole you want to go into, and you just stick it right into the hole, just like a regular pegboard, like so. And then what you do is when you finish your granny square, you just put the granny square over the little holes, right? So through these little holes here, and it just kind of holds down in place. And so what it does is, it's really important to block your granny squares because they have a tendency to curl and roll. And if you're crocheting them together, it's really beneficial to have them all be the same size. So when you put them on a pegboard like this, see, they're all nice and square, and then I just push them down and I've got them all lined up right here. I am such an organizing nut. This right here makes me so happy just to see them all in place like this. Oh, it makes me so happy. I just like to play with it. That's how excited I am about this. But you can see how it makes the granny squares look really, really nice and square. Now you could also wet block these and then put them down, and as they dry, they'll get a little bit dry. I decided not to do that just because I'm going to end up blocking the whole sweater when it's all done anyways. But you could certainly do that. This is 100% merino wash wool, but it's not going to be a felting wool, so it shouldn't be a problem. But I did not wet block these. I just put them right on my little pegs, and we're all good to go. So as I said, I'm building this on the diagonal, and it's a little tricky. I don't have a pattern. I'm writing out the pattern myself, but I had a inspiration from a sweater that I saw in a catalog with Johnny Was. And when it's all done, I'll show you too. In another video, I'll compare the two. But this is basically, like I said, this is here going to be the bottom, down across the bottom here. And so each one of these squares is going to kind of go up at a bias. So they're going to be more of a diamond looking shape, which is, again, interesting. It's giving it a little bit of a different shape and different look to a traditional granny square, which just goes straight up and down. As you can see this here behind me, this is a linen stitch granny square temperature blanket that I did. I'm kind of obsessed with granny squares. They're so easy to do, they're so easy to learn, and there's so much versatility. So I did a little bit of research. I'm like, okay, why are they called granny squares? Why do we have an International Granny Square Month and a day and so forth? So I thought, maybe you're interested too. So there was a lady by the name of Mrs. Phelps, that's how she was referred to, who wrote an article for the April 5th, 1885 Prairie Farmer magazine. It was like a newspaper, and that was the first print that anybody saw of a mention of a granny square. Now, I did further research, and they say that the very first image or a presentation, if you will, of a granny square was in 1891. So, the dates might have been a little bit iffy, but Mrs. Phelps, apparently, it's well noted that she wrote about them in 1885. But in 1891, they were featured in a magazine called The Art of Crocheting, and it was actually an engraver plate, like you would do a stamping of it, right? It wasn't until 1897 when the first granny square pattern was written and found. So it took a little bit of time. So why do they call them granny squares? Well, it's probably kind of obvious, maybe has something to do with grannies and so forth. But what they found is that women would take old socks, and remnants of clothing and different things like that, and they would unravel them, or scraps of yarn that they had left over from other things, and then they would make granny squares. So it was a really great way to use up these cute little, like the scraps and errant pieces of yarn if you didn't have a full skein, and to make these little granny squares. And this is something that the grannies did. So thus, that's how the name began. How we got a whole entire month, I don't know. Now, I found that the Granny Square month actually happens in July. So I was a little concerned, or confused rather, about that, why we have an International Granny Square Day on August 15th, but the month is actually in July. So maybe that's a UK thing, and maybe the US is different, but I know that it's somewhere between July and August. Honestly, could I care less? If every day wasn't Granny Square month or Granny Square Day, I probably would be okay with that. I wanted to show you, all speaking Granny Squares, this is one of my favorite Granny Square books. And this is called the Granny Square Sourcebook, Ultimate Granny Square Sourcebook. And it is full of these designers who have submitted, and each designer submits maybe 2 or 3 designs of Granny Squares. And I could show you this whole book. This is one that I've done several times. This has flowers, and they go from beginner all the way to intermediate. And then, of course, back here in the end, you've got some really pretty, extravagant, more of the advanced granny squares. What I really like about this is, you can go from simple with 3 or 4 colors. You can go with something a little bit more intensive. But they also have the charts, and we're going to do a video here shortly that talks specifically about how to read charts. And as I've said before, learning how to read charts is probably one of the most important things that you can do as a crocheter, because oftentimes you're going to find a pattern that you absolutely love that was written by somebody who maybe is from another country, and so English is not their first language or their native tongue, right? And so to write out directions can be very tedious, and oftentimes it can be very confusing. Additionally, if you guys recently watched my whole segment on the difference between US crochet terms and UK crochet terms, if you're looking at a granny square pattern that is written in a UK term and either you miss that little nugget or it's just not really made readily available, then your pattern is going to be all off. But a chart is universal. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, this is what I'm talking about down here, these little charts here. Okay, so there's no instruction, there's no writing, basically. You've got the whole pattern written out over here, here, and here. But if you don't want to read the pattern, or maybe English isn't your first language, you can read these charts. And as long as you know what the symbols are that are representative of the stitches, then you can use a chart. It was probably one of the most valuable things that I taught myself in becoming a crocheter, was how to read these charts. And I find myself more often than not now, when I find a pattern that I like, I'll just follow the chart as opposed to actually reading the actual instructions. So this book here it's been kind of my powerhouse book for granny squares. I use it for inspiration. Sometimes I might change something up here or there. Or if you just look, I just want to make a sweater or something, and you want to use, a variety of different granny squares. Well, look, this is everything that's in this book. There's so many options in here. It was about $24.95. It might have been a little less because I got it on Amazon. Typically, they're a little bit less. But I absolutely love. So this is my favorite granny square book. And I'll include the link to it below. But this is by Meteor Book. So again, there's 2 or 3 patterns for each designer, and then it tells you up in the corner who the designer is and what country they come from, which is kind of cool. Like there's some here from Australia, Argentina, again, Australia, South Africa. So it's just kind of nice to see how people do it. But once again, as long as they have those charts in there, so easy to figure these things out. All right, so I'm going to show you how to do the most basic granny square that you can think of, but I wanted to use this variegated yarn. As you saw, you can see what I'm making here was just my real basic granny squares. And you can see how it's real pretty. But again, I'm having to change colors with each row, which is going to get a little tedious. I really try to weave the ends in, but that's going to be a big project when it's all done and I have to go in and weave all of these ends. So I wanted to try making a granny square out of a variegated yarn and then just letting the yarn do the work for me. So I'm just going to go ahead and show you how this works. Now, there's two ways to get started. You can either do the chain and then go into a circle, or you can do the magic square. I've done the magic square before. I'm going to show you how to do the chain 4. I find that sometimes using the magic square, you end up having a really, really long tail at the end, and that we're wasting a lot of yarn. So I thought I'd give this one a try and see. So we start off with the chain 4. So there's 2, here's 3, and there's 4. There's my chain 4. And from here, you just take your hook and you go into your very first stitch and you just slip stitch into it. And it can be a little bit tricky to get started. You just slip stitch right in there. All right. And then from here, we're going to go ahead and do a 2 chain move, and that's going to count as your first double crochet. You're going to yarn over, go into the hole that you made when you connected the last stitch with the first stitch. So it's right in here. You're going to go in there, and then you're going to make your first double crochet. Now I'm going to do 3 double crochets in each segment. So the first chain 2 I did is the first double crochet. This is the second double crochet. I'm going to do 3 more, or 1 more. So I'm going to come through, go in through that center, come through, and then double crochet again. Now I've created my first segment. From here, I'm going to chain 1, go back into that loop, yarn over, go into the loop, and I'm going to do 3 double crochets right here. So there's 1, here's 2, here's 3, there's my second grouping of 3, chain 1, which moves you to the next grouping, yarn over, go back into that center space, double crochet, yarn over, go back into the center, and as you do these, the center becomes more and more obvious right there. So there's 2, so I'm going to do 1 more, coming through, yarn over, 1 more, and this is going to be my last. And if you get lost, you can just sort of take a look at it and you can see there's 1 grouping there, there's 2 groupings here, here's 3, so this is my last grouping. Yarn over, come all the way in, and then 2 more. So 3 double crochets coming into each one of the segments. And now my first square is finished. Now I'm going to chain 1 and I'm going to slip it right into the top, not the actual chain that you started, but into the top of that stitch, coming through and chained it. And so now my first grouping is done. And you can see there's 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Now, instead of changing color, this is where it's going to get a little bit interesting and exciting. I'm going to chain 2, now as I finish this row and I've got those 4, what you want to do is you want to slip stitch over to that first hole that you create in the last row. So I'm already there. I'm going to go through into this one here. So slip stitching basically just moves your yarn along without adding any stitches. Now I'm going to yarn over. I'm going to put 3 double crochets in here. There's 1, yarn over, 2, yarn over, 3. Now, because it's in that corner, I'm going to do chain 2, and I'm going to do another 3 double crochets right here into that same space. And that's how your granny square starts to grow. So here you can see I have 3 double crochets, chain 2, 3 double crochets. Now I'm going into this next square, so I'm going to chain 2, come into that segment, 3 double crochets, there's 1, oops, there's 2, There's 3, 2 chains, 3 double crochets once more. Okay, so now I've made, and you can see how the square is starting to come together. You're getting those nice sharp edges. Where you chain the 2 in the corner, that's how you get those nice edges. And you can see the yarn is already starting to change color. So now I'm going to chain 2, go into that 3rd space, and if you can't find it, just count out 3 double crochets. So I'm putting 3 double crochets right here. That's my 3rd. I'm going to chain 2, 3 double crochets here. Okay, so that's my 3rd corner. You can see how it's really starting to come together. I'm going to chain 2, and I'm going into my last section, which is right here. Yarn over, 3 double crochets. See how easy it is? This is it. This is the whole entire stitch. I'm going to chain 2 and go back in and do 3 more of those double crochets. Now my square is complete. And so what I'm going to do from here is I'm going to just chain 1, and I'm going to slip stitch into that first actual stitch, not the chain, but the first double crochet stitch. I'm going right in here, yarn over, and then pulling through. And now you can see how the square is really starting to take some shape. Once again, I am going to slip stitch over to that first space. So there's 1, slip stitch right in here. Sometimes it's hard to find. Sometimes it can be a little bit tight in the beginning. Now I'm back into that corner stitch. I'm going to chain 2, because remember, that's my first double crochet. Coming into that space, there's 1 full double crochet. So now there's my 3, right? There's the chain and the 2 double crochets. Chain 2, coming back in, 3 double crochets. Now, this is the only part where it's a little interesting. Because I'm not going into a corner, I'm only going over into the side stitches, which I didn't have before. I'm only going to yarn over and pull through once, chain 1, go into this side square, and I'm only going to do 3 double crochets. I'm not doing the 4. The only time that, I'm not doing the 6. The only time that you do 6 is when you're in the corners. So now that piece is done. I chain 1, and then I move into the corner where I'm doing those 6 double crochets, split by the chain 2. So there's 2. Here's 3. Chain 2. 3 double crochets. And so on. So if I had, and I'm going to keep on working around and around and around. If I had tons of this yarn, I could make one huge blanket starting with this little granny square right here. And that's what makes it so easy and so mindless. So whether you're using scraps or you're using a whole new yarn and you're looking for something, different, sometimes you can even get a bunch of variegated yarns like this and then make these squares that all kind of accent each other. I would just say that you probably want to make sure that the yarn that you use is all the same weight. So if you're going to go with a 4 or a wool or something like that, it really makes a much better finished product that I think you'll be happier with if you use the same yarn, the same dye lot, if that's what you're going with, the same style, all of that stuff. It's because of the times you're going to have some stitches that look bigger and some look smaller, and it's going to be really hard to stitch them together. So I'll finish off this square, and then we can see, but you can already see how the colors are making this really interesting, from that blue, like kind of a teal aqua, to the darker, and then moving into the purple. And then we're going to be getting into a lighter green here in just a minute. and then you chain 1, go back into that corner stitch, 3 double crochets, and because it's a corner, the way that we keep those corner stitches sharp so you have a nice neat square is to do those chain 2s, and then you come back around and you do the 3 double crochets. And what's nice about granny squares too is it's really easy to see if you've lost count where your stitches are. I know that's a corner. I can see that there's 3 double crochets there and 3 double crochets there. I know that's a side and 3 and 3. So, you know, if you happen to mess up and you have like 2 sets of 3 double crochets on a side, one has, then you can go back and correct yourself. But it's pretty easy to see your stitches, and if you did make a mistake and you have to rip it out, you know, where you have to go back to. Chain 1, and then you move into the top of the first double crochet. So there you have it, and it just goes around and around and around. Okay, sometimes, okay, I have a riddle for you. When is a granny square not a granny square? When it's a triangle. Huh? Yeah, okay. So I thought, because oftentimes you need to have triangles when you want to finish off an edge with a sweater or something like that. So I thought, I'm going to go ahead and show you how to make a granny square triangle or a granny triangle. So first thing we're going to do, is I'm going to go ahead and chain 4, just like I do with a granny square. Chain 4. And once you get the hang of it, it's a little tricky at first because it's kind of hard to see it. Once you get the hang of it, it's so simple. So there's my chain 4. As you can see, I'm going to take this hook and I'm going to go into my very first stitch, and I'm going to do a slip stitch to make a loop and cinch it off. Just like so. I'm going to chain 2. That's going to be my first granny square, or my first double crochet. I'm going into my loop. Double crochet. So now there's 2. I'm going to go back into that center loop. Now there's 3. Now here's where it's a little interesting. Because I'm only doing 2 sets of granny squares, because I'm only doing a half, then this next one actually needs to be my corner. So I'm going to chain 2 and then go back into my center and do another 3 double crochets. There's 1, there's 2, and there is 3. Now I know I just did the 1, but this is right here. This is where my corner is going to start. So I'm going to turn my work. That's the other thing too. You're not going to be going in a complete circle, or rather a square, like you do with a granny square, a continuous granny square. So I'm going to slip stitch back to that center. There's 1. There's 2. So now I'm back to my center. I'm going to do my 3 double crochets. There's 1, 2, 3. I'm going to do 2 chains because remember, this is going to be my corner. 3 double crochets right in here. Now I want to go down and start on this corner because you have to keep adding on. So I'm going to chain 1, yarn over, come into the end, find that last loop in this corner, right? It's right on the base, and we're going to do 3 double crochets right there. There's 1, 2, 3. Now you can see how it's starting to come together. Now again, we're going to turn our work because we don't want to go down this side. So from here, I'm going to put 3 double crochets right here on the end. Here's 1, 2, 3. Chain 1 because it's not the corner, I'm just doing a side. So chaining 1, coming into the center here, doing just 3 double crochets, chain 1 to take me up to the corner where I'm going to do those 2 sets of 3 double crochets. And remember, I chain 2 to keep my corner nice and sharp. Then I go back in and I do 3 double crochets. Chain 1 because I'm going into that side stitch. Chain 1, and then I'm going to put 3 on this end. Yarn over, coming through, finding that last stitch right at the edge. There's 1. There's 2. And there's 3. So even though these 2 corners are actual corners, it's only a half a corner. So you're not going to do the 2 sets of double crochets up here. You're only going to do the 1 because you want it to stay nice and straight. Then you're just going to yarn over, chain 1, turn your work, come back around, put 3 double crochets in here. Only 3. Uh-oh. Going to chain 1, go into this next grouping, which is right here, 3 double crochets here. Chain 1, 3 double crochets into this next stitch, space, chain 1. Now I'm coming back up to the top of that triangle, yarn over, and now I'm going to put in those 2 sets of 3 double crochets. There's the first set. I'm going to chain 2, and then here's the second set. Chain 1. Now I'm coming down the back side. 3 double crochets here. I'm working into that space there. And then remember, we want to add 3 double crochets right here on the corner, but only 3, even though technically it would be a corner. We would normally see the second half coming up on the other side. All right, and there you have it. And that is how you make a granny triangle. And then you would just attach this onto the edges where it calls for it to be, where it calls for you to have a nice edge, just like this. Well, there you have it. So this is national, or rather international. So there you have it. Today is International Granny Square Day, and I am so excited and so proud to share this day with you. It's like Christmas for me. And we've worked on our granny square triangles. We have worked on our granny squares and also working on the bias. And I also showed you our granny square blocker. So this is it for Kimberly for Knit for Brains today's episode. I hope to see you soon. Thanks so much for telling all your friends about us. We're getting so many new friends here. I'm so excited. And I've got some exciting things up in the works. So stay tuned. Make sure you hit that notification button so you get all the episodes. You don't miss one. Again, thanks so much for sharing with your friends and your family. Tell them what we're doing over here. Like and subscribe. And as always, I'll see you soon.